All right, with all those announcements, 2 Kings, chapters 9 and 10 this morning. And so we've been going through the book of 1st and 2nd Kings, which is one book in the Hebrew, divided into two books in our Bibles. But we've been going through these two books now. This is actually week 22 of our look at 1st and 2nd Kings. And we're at the point in our study here in 2 Kings where what we started to do last week as we were in 2 Kings 8 and 9 is we're at this point where we're starting to look at the fulfillment of some outstanding prophecies. And by outstanding, I don't mean just kind of great, although they are great. I mean unfulfilled prophecies. And in particular, way back in 1 Kings chapter 19, you recall the story, even just from your past Bible knowledge, you recall the story of that when the prophet Elijah was on Mount Sinai having a pity party before God. No one loves me, I have no friends. And God says, no, actually, I've got 7,000 that haven't bowed their knee, and I'm about to do some things in you and through you. And way back in 1 Kings chapter 19, God told him that I've got some things for you to do, Elijah. This is what the Lord said. This is 1 Kings 19, verse 15. Then the Lord said to Elijah, go and return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus, and when you arrive, anoint Hazael as king over Syria. You also shall anoint Jehu, the son of Nimshi, as king over Israel, and Elisha, the son of Shaphat of Abel-Molah, you shall anoint as prophet in your place. And now, if you're kind of paying attention as you're reading through the rest of 1 Kings and the 2 Kings, you'd notice that when Elijah finally is taken to heaven in the first chapters of 2 Kings, that he's actually only ever accomplished one of those things. The only one of those things that he ever did was to anoint Elisha as his successor. And so there are still these things God told him should happen. That is, a new king of Syria and a new king of Israel, but those things had not yet transpired. And so we started to look last week in 2 Kings 8 and 9, and these things have kind of started to kind of be fulfilled. And so, for example, we saw in 2 Kings chapter 8, we saw that the king of Syria, a guy by the name of Ben-Hadad, who has been around for really the entire book of 1 Kings and has been a real thorn in the side of Israel and Judah, that he passed away, not naturally. He passed away being killed by one of his friends, quote unquote, a guy named Hazael. He actually smothered him in his bed. And so we have a new king of Syria, Hazael. And then we saw in the first few verses of 2 Kings 9, we saw that this man named Jehu, which is kind of the last outstanding part of the prophecy to Elijah, that he is anointed as king over Israel. And he's anointed by a guy that Elisha, who now is the reigning prophet, Elisha sends to anoint Jehu, who was the commander of the army of Israel, anoints him and tells him, hey, you're going to be the new king in place of the current king, a guy by the name of Jehoram. And you recall last week, thanks for all your emails, about the two Jehorams and the two Ahaziahs and all that. And we talked about all that last week, right? And so kind of where we are as we begin today's passage in 2 Kings 9, verse 14. Where we are is in Syria, Ben-Hadad's been killed, and Hazael is on the throne. In Judah, Jehoshaphat had been king. He was not half bad guy. His son, Jehoram of Judah, right, was king for a while, about 8 years. He dies, and his son, Ahaziah, has become king. And so as we begin this chapter, or verse 14, middle of the chapter, Ahaziah is king of Judah. And again, think back to last week, or take us on board right now. So Ahaziah, bad guy, especially bad because he was married to a gal by the name of Athaliah, who's going to show up next week's lesson. And Athaliah, the wife of Ahaziah, king of Judah, stick with me, Athaliah is the sister of Jehoram, the king of Israel, not the father of Ahaziah, different Jehoram, right? And so what's happened essentially is the king of Judah, Ahaziah, has married into the family of the kings of Israel. And this actually is important because the kings of Israel are a line of evil kings. Matter of fact, all the kings of Israel are always evil, no matter what. There's 22 of them, and they're all evil, every single one of them, right? And they're in the midst kind of like their heyday. The kind of pariah of evil kings is Ahab, right? And Ahab had a son named Jehoram, and Jehoram's sister was Athaliah. She's married into the king of Judah, which is the other nation we're tracking, right? And so essentially, these two nations, Judah and Israel, are now kind of tied together in marriage. And that's important because we saw that when Jehu was appointed king of Israel last week's lesson, that he was anointed with the task that I want you to wipe out all of the household of Ahab, right? And so kill all those folks because I'm cutting off that line of evil kings, which in and of itself is striking, but that's Israel. The king of Judah, Ahaziah, is now married into that family, right? So he needs killing too, essentially, right? We'll see here coming up. And so if you're still with me, that's the context. That's where we are here in this grand narrative. And so we're going to pick it up here in 2 Kings chapter 9 in verse 14. And it says this. It says, and so Jehu, the son of Jehoshaphat, a different Jehoshaphat than the king of Judah, don't worry about it. Jehu, the son of Jehoshaphat, the son of Nimshi, conspired against Joram, who's also named Jehoram. Now, Joram had been defending Ramoth-Gilead, he and all Israel, against Hazael, king of Syria. But King Jehoram had returned to Jezreel to recover from the wounds which the Syrians had inflicted on him when he fought with Hazael, king of Syria. And so essentially what's happened is this. So the Syrians under Hazael are fighting the Israelites, under Jehoram, king, and they're fighting at a place called Ramoth-Gilead. And so they're having a war there together. It's kind of in the background. And in this war, as we'll see here in a second, the king of Israel, Jehoram, he's injured in the war. And so since he's injured, he flees to his winter palace in a place called Jezreel, where he's recovering from the injuries that he has received. He has no idea that the commander of his army, a guy named Jehu, has been appointed to be the next king, right? So Jehu has been anointed as king, but Jehoram has no idea about that, right? And so that's the background. Verse 15, but King Jehoram had returned to Jezreel to recover from the wounds which the Syrians had inflicted on him when he fought with Hazael, king of Syria. And Jehu said, if you are so minded, let no one leave or escape from the city to go tell it in Jezreel. All right, so Jehu has a secret. His secret is that Elisha has appointed him to be the next king. And so there in Ramoth-Gilead, that's where the war is taking place. He's the commander of the army, so he's there with the army, right? He's been appointed to be king. He's like, hey, don't tell anyone that I'm the next king. And especially don't tell the other king back in Jezreel, right? Because that wouldn't sort of go well if he knows that I'm usurping the throne, right? And so that's kind of all the background kind of going on right there. And by the way, it's about a 45-mile trek from Ramoth-Gilead, where the war is, and where Jehu is, 45 miles down south, well, southwest actually, to Jezreel, which is where the king is, King Joram or King Jehoram, right? Verse 16, and so Jehu rode in a chariot and went to Jezreel, for Joram was laid up there. And Ahaziah, king of Judah, had come down to see him. So that's a side note. And so the king of Judah, Ahaziah, who is not involved in this war with the Syrians, right? He hears that his mother's brother, his uncle Joram, has been injured and is recovering in Jezreel. And so then Ahaziah, who is again married into that family, he rides over to Jezreel to check on his uncle. Verse 17, now a watchman stood on the tower of Jezreel, and he saw the company of Jehu as he came. And he said, I see a company of men. And Joram said, get horsemen and send him out to meet him, and let him say, is it peace? All right, so a couple things here. So note there, and so that verse 17, the last phrase is it peace? And that same question is going to be asked 5 times in this chapter. It's going to come up again in verse 18. It's going to be in verse 19. It's going to be in verse 22. And it's going to be in verse 31. 5 different people ask the question, is it peace? And the author of 2 Kings, who's the prophet Jeremiah, he's trying to kind of clue us into the fact that actually there's no peace for the wicked, right? Isaiah 57 verse 21, actually that's what Isaiah says, and Isaiah was a contemporary of all these events. He said, there is no peace for the wicked, says the Lord, right? Sometimes the wicked seem to prosper for a bit, and even sometimes God will use the wicked to punish the wicked, which actually is what he's doing here in this chapter. We're going to see that this guy Jehu, who is the new appointed king, he's not any better than the folks he's killing, right? And it's not going to go well for him either. There's no peace for the wicked. So how do you get peace? Well, Romans 5:1 is the verse I thought of. I'm sure there's a lot of other verses we could talk about, but Paul says, Romans 5:1, having been justified by faith, we have peace with God, right? And so if you want peace, the only way to get true peace is through faith in Christ, right? Anyways, back up in verse 17 that we just read. And so there in that context, so there is Joram or Jehoram, king of Israel, who doesn't know that he's no longer king. He's there recovering in Jezreel. He sees Jehu, who is coming down from Ramoth Gilead, coming down to kill him, but he doesn't know he's coming to kill him because Jehu is like, shh, don't tell anyone that I'm the new king, right? Yeah, and so all he sees is like this dust cloud on the horizon, right? And so I told you it's about 45 miles from Ramoth Gilead to Jezreel. And it's pretty flat. It's a plain. And so you can actually see really for about 30 miles at this area. And so he sees like a dust cloud. He sees someone approaching, but he has no idea who it is, right? And in his mind, I think he's thinking there's a couple possibilities here. Like worst case scenario in his mind is probably that, hey, the Syrians have overrun in the army, they've killed Jehu, and now they're coming to get me, right? So, that's a possibility, that maybe this is a group of Syrians coming to kill me. Or secondarily, maybe he thinks, well, actually, we've won the battle. And this is the army kind of coming back to tell me, like, good news. We've won, we've killed all the Syrians, right? And those seem to be like the two possibilities there that can be going on, and which is why he sends a horseman into verse 17, like, well, go ask him and ask, like, is there peace now, right? Have we won? Which is kind of what he's hoping. Verse 18. And so the horseman went to meet him and said, thus says the king, is it peace? And Jehu said, what have you to do with peace? Turn around and follow me. And so, apparently, in my mind at least, like, the horseman and the guy that's gone here to ask the question, this guy is probably sort of part of the king's like special guard. He's part of the army. Jehu is the commander of the army. They know each other. He gets there, and Jehu is like, just follow me, right? So he kind of falls in line, behind him, not knowing maybe what's going on, or maybe he does know what's going on, right? It's whenever there is like turmoil, you always have to kind of, choose, whose team are you going to be on, right? And maybe he kind of puts it together and is going like, oh, like decrepit, injured king, or, hard-charging commander of the army. Like I'm going to go with those guys, right? And so he gets in line behind him. Middle of verse 18. And Jehu said, what have you to do with peace? Turn around and follow me. And so the watchman reported saying, the messenger went to him, but is not coming back. And so, again, I wonder if maybe Jehoram, injured Jehoram there in Jezreel, I wonder if he's like thinking, well, that's interesting. Like he didn't come back. He's got to be thinking, well, it must then it must be good news, right? Because if it was bad news, like they would have killed him or something else, would have happened, but they're just kind of following him. So this seems like it's probably a good thing. Verse 19, and so he sent out a second horseman who came to them and said, thus says the king, is it peace? Everyone wants peace. And Jehu answered, what have you to do with peace? turn around and follow me. And so it's like just a replay of the previous thing. And so now both of these messengers are both following Jehu as he rides fast to Jezreel to kill the king, but no one knows that's the plan, or at least the king doesn't. Verse 20, and so the watchman reported saying, he went up to them and is not coming back. And the driving is like the driving of Jehu, the son of Nimshi, for he drives furiously, right? So apparently this guy had a style, right? We all have a style apparently, right? It's like we all walk a certain way, we all drive a certain way, and people might recognize us when we don't realize they're recognizing us. That's why, on my car, I have no Christian bumper stickers whatsoever, right? Because I don't want to dishonor God's name, by someone that sees my bad driving. And so maybe kind of pro tip for you to think through. So this guy's driving furiously. Again, in my mind, how many ways are there to drive a chariot? I don't know. It just seems like a bit overkill. But I watched the video in heaven, and apparently there's more than one way. Verse 21. And so Joram says, well, make ready. All right, so I've sent two guys. They're getting closer, right? They're getting closer. And the two guys I sent are both just following him, right? So he says, 21, I want get ready. Get my chariot ready. We're going to go out and kind of solve the problem ourselves. It's hard to find good help, right? We're going to go talk to this guy. And his chariot was made ready. And then Joram, king of Israel, and Ahaziah, king of Judah, went out, right? And so both kings, because remember, the nephew Ahaziah is visiting Joram because he's injured. And so they both get together, and they both go out with their chariots and their entourage to see what's going on. And they went out to meet Jehu, and they met him on the property of Naboth the Jezreelite. All right, so this is an important detail, right? And so yet further unfulfilled prophecy. And so as we're reading through the book of 1 Kings and getting to 2 Kings, something else that should have stood out to us is that in 1 Kings 21, God very clearly told the family of Ahaz, hey, you're going to die and be eaten by some dogs. Have a nice day, right? And your wife, Jezebel, she's going to die and be eaten by some dogs. And your family is going to die, and it's going to happen on the ground of Naboth the Jezreelite, right? And you remember Naboth had that vineyard that Ahab wanted, and he couldn't get it, so he's sulking in his bedroom. And his wife's like, hey, I got an idea. I'll get it for you, right? And she sends some people and some letters and all that, and there's this big banquet, and they murder Naboth, and they take his vineyard, right, for the king. That all happened, back earlier in chapter 19 of the previous book. And so that's sort of all there. But even sort of, I was just thinking through this morning, right? So, Jehoram has got to know about that, right? Because it's his dad was the guy that received that prophecy, and his dad was killed right after that. At the previous war at Ramoth Gilead in chapter 22 of the previous book, right? So he's going to know about that whole deal. You and your family, you're going to die on this piece of ground, right? So if I've got someone who has prophesied, Dave, you're going to die in a traffic accident, on the corner of Capitol Boulevard and US 1. You know what? I'm never going that way home. You know what I'm saying? It's like the Jaws franchise, right? Now, am I the only one? 1977, Jaws 1, 2, and 3 came. It's there's this psychotic shark that has a bone to pick with this particular family. And what do they keep doing? Going on boat trips, right? Take your vacation in Kansas. You know what I'm saying? Anyways, but that's literally what's going on here, right? That's literally what's going on here. He knows the deal, right? Some prophet that everything he said has always come true. He said, I'm going to die there. Let's go there and see what happens, right? Well, this is where they meet. They meet on the ground here. Is it peace, Jehu? And again, verse 22, and so he answered, what peace? He says, so the response of Jehu is, what peace, as long as the harlotries of your mother Jezebel and her witchcraft are so many. Also now the penny drops, right? And Jehoram realizes, he's not coming back to tell me that we've won the battle. he's coming back because he's got a bone to pick with me and my family, right? And I imagine that it really kind of took him a bit by surprise because, as we'll see here, he's about to die. But I mean, he doesn't have like his special guard with him. He's not even wearing like any armor apparently because he gets shot in the back, and so I don't think he expects this at all. But that's the message. And like, no, there's no peace because of you and because of your mom. Verse 23. Then Jehoram turned around and fled and said to his nephew Ahaziah, "Treachery, Ahaziah." Yeah, treachery. Verse 24, and now Jehu drew his bow with full strength and shot Jehoram between his arms. And the arrow came out at his heart, and he sank down in his chariot. I love those details. You know, he drew it with full strength, in case you were wondering, right? And yet it came out at his heart, in case you were wondering about that as well. Verse 25. And then Jehu says to Bidkar, otherwise unknown, and then in the narrative, his captain. And so usually a chariot would have have a captain and a driver, and then maybe a dignitary, and so either two or three folks in a chariot. And Jehu's, the king elect or the king appointed. He's got a guy, Bidkar, and he says to him. Then Jehu says to Bidkar's captain, "Pick him up and throw him into the tract of field of Naboth the Jezreelite. For remember, when you and I were riding together behind Ahab his father, that the Lord had laid this burden upon him. Surely I saw yesterday the blood of Naboth and the blood of his sons, says the Lord, and I will repay you in this plot, says the Lord. Now therefore, take and throw him on the plot of ground according to the word of the Lord." And again, like, this is not an unknown thing. You go, it's 1 Kings 21, verse 19. Like, this had been in play for 15 years, right? This prophecy. But there he is, and so there they throw him down. Although there is a detail there that's not given earlier. It says that, surely I saw yesterday the blood of Naboth and the blood of his sons. In the previous narrative, we aren't actually told that Naboth's sons were killed by Jezebel and Ahab. But logically, they would have had to have been killed because Ahab was after their land, and that if they just killed Dad, the sons would have inherited it, right? And so, all that to say, it wasn't just one murder earlier, man. It was a murder of the entire family. But yet God was keeping score, God was keeping track, and God was going to balance the books. And I was just kind of thinking through this, and I was thinking about the way sort of God works. And I was reading this past week. I was reading through the Psalms, and I came across that psalm that's always so convicting, Psalm 73. Where the psalmist is just sort of reveling and saying, I almost lost my faith because of the wicked how they prosper, and how they lay down in soft beds and everyone loves them and whatever. And he says, but then I went into the house of the Lord, and then I understood, right? And I was thinking about that and about this context. Like, I wonder, like, how many people who may have known about Naboth and seen the murder of him and his family, and it seems like God did nothing, right? But yet God was keeping score. God was going to do something, right? He was going to balance the books. It's like I always say, right? Man, God works slowly and he works unexpectedly, is the way God usually works, right? And so we always need to kind of temper how we're thinking about the world and about God. And again, don't mistake God's patience and his long suffering for his approval, right? And don't mistake, God's slow timetable with thinking that somehow God has forgotten or that the score has gotten out of balance. Now, God's always keeping track, and God here balances the books by killing Joram for the sins of his family, and not just him, but his mother and his father. Verse 27, but when Ahaziah, king of Judah, saw this, he fled by the road to Beth-Hagen, and so Jehu pursued him and said, "Shoot him also in his chariot," and they shot him at the ascent of Gur, which is by Iblim, and then he fled to Megiddo, and there he died. Now, if you look over, don't turn there, but if you read over in 2 Chronicles chapter 22, there's a much kind of fuller account of this part of this event, and actually, when you read that account with this account, it seems that Ahaziah actually gets shot like 3 times in 3 different places over the course of a number of weeks. And so he's kind of like fleeing like a fugitive. But unlike Harrison Ford, he doesn't actually escape. He actually gets killed. But it's kind of compressed for us here into like 2 verses. But if you want to read more, it's 2 Chronicles 22. verse 28, and his servants carried him in a chariot to Jerusalem, and they buried him in his tomb with his fathers in the city of David. In the 11th year of Joram, the son of Ahab, Ahaziah had become king over Judah. And so, two kings now have both been murdered. The books have been balanced. We're starting to do away with Ahab's family, which was the charge from the prophet to Jehu back earlier, in chapter 9, verses 7 through 9. And so now we've got one king, Jehu, who's in charge. So verse 30, turn our attention here to Jezebel. Now, when Jehu had come to Jezreel, Jezebel heard of it. And so what has she heard? She's heard that Jehu has killed her son, the Joram, and has killed her grandson, Ahaziah. She's his grandson because he is the son of her daughter, who is the brother to Jehoram. And so both these kings have been killed. King of Israel, king of Judah, her son, her grandson. Jezebel heard of it, and she put paint on her eyes and adorned her head, and she looked through the window. And so you kind of gotta wonder, like, what's she doing? I think, in one sense, when you read different commentators, some people say that, she was trying to kind of get, like, all gussied up, to maybe, like, look fancy and maybe, like, seduce Jehu by putting on, the paint and adorning her head and whatnot. But I think that's probably actually unlikely because, like, she's, like, 40 years older than him, which is a little creepy. That's what she's trying to do. I know in some cultures, like, that's okay, but seems to be a bit overboard. I could deal with, like, a 10-year gap, maybe 15, but, like, 40, no. So I think what she's doing here, I think she's just trying to sort of look, like, regal. I think she knows the score. I think she knows that her time is up because she's heard the prophecies as well, right? And she's seen them all come true. I think she's just kind of trying to go down like in a dignified way. Like, I'm going to look regal and put on my robes and the war paint and my crown or whatever. But we're not really told why she did it. But she did it. But I don't think she's trying to seduce him because verse 31, she says, and then as Jehu entered the gate, she says, "Is it peace?" That's the fifth time the question is asked. "Is it peace, Zimri, murderer of your master?" Well, this is not a good pickup line, by the way. Like, don't try this, right? Yeah, because Zimri, now we got to go back in time here, and I'm not going to read the verses to you, but you go back much earlier in the book of 1 Kings, and you see that go back 45 years and 6 kings ago in Israel. And Zimri was this guy who he murdered the king of Israel, a guy named Elah. He murdered him and then got to be king for 7 days. And his 7-day reign, it ended when the nation appointed a guy named Omri to be king instead, who was the father of Ahab, by the way. And Zimri then burned down a house upon himself and died. And so he was essentially a servant who killed the king and took the place. And so she's calling Jehu, you're like Zimri. That is, you're a servant who killed the king. And what she's saying is you're going to have a very short reign. You're going to be like Zimri, 7-day reign, which is actually not what happens. He actually reigns for 28 years and then has 3 generations follow him in reigning. So again, she's like insulting him. And so I think she's trying to look regal and look dignified. She knows the score. And so kind of like last kind of zinger, like she insults the dude and calls him Zimri and kind of has her heyday there. But verse 32, and as he looked up at the window, she's up on a window, several stories up in the palace, he asked the question, who's on my side? Who? And so 2 or 3 eunuchs looked down at him. What was it, 2 or 3? I hate when the Bible does this, right? 2 or 3, I don't know. Jeremiah was like, I can't remember. I'm old. So like he sees her up there, right? And so he asks, who's with me? Essentially, and who's with her? So again, like you have to kind of know the score in the midst of like a regime change, right? This is true, in any context, right? And I imagine like these eunuchs, in my mind, like Jezebel doesn't seem like a very pleasant person to begin with. You know what I'm saying? Like if you read the past stuff about it, she's not like a happy, pleasant person. So she's got these eunuchs who have other problems. They're eunuchs, right? They're having to serve her for whatever it's been, like 30 or 40 years. And like they've been like talking at coffee break every day. I just want to kill this woman, right? You know what I'm saying? And now there's a chance, right? Like you get to kill her. And so like who's on my side? Well, 2 or 3 looked down. It's probably actually more than 2 or 3. It's probably like they're fighting each other. Like so who gets to push her, right? Because they all want to kill her. And then he said, throw her down. And so they threw her down. And some of her blood spattered on the wall and on the horses, and he trampled her underfoot. So you clearly, like, you know, the kids' Bible that we had for our kids was not accurate because they had her like about a story and a half up, right? Like looking out the window. And I mean, if her blood spatters on the wall and the horses, like this is going to be a pretty big fall, I'm guessing, right? I mean, I'm just guessing, no experience with this, but I'm just guessing. And so, man, she falls. And then the horses run her over, trample her. Verse 34. And when he had gone in, that's this Jehu. So he's gone to Jezreel, all right? And Jezreel is the winter palace. When he'd gone in, he ate and he drank. And then he said, go now and see to this accursed woman and bury her, for she was the king's daughter. And so you go back much earlier and you realize actually Jezebel, she was the daughter of the king of Phoenicia, which was a neighboring nation. And she had married Ahab in this political marriage, this alliance between these powerful nations. And so she was a king's daughter. She was a king's daughter. She became a king's wife, and she was a king's mother as well, right? And so Jehu, in this, I guess, kind of a drunken stupor, he's like, yeah, like she was kind of royal. So let's go bury her. Verse 35. And so they went to bury her, but they found no more of her than her skull and the feet and the palms of her hands. I guess that's like too tough to eat or whatever. I don't know. But that's what was left. Verse 36. Therefore they came back and they told him, and they said, this is the word of the Lord, which he spoke by his servant Elijah the Tishbite. This is back in 1 Kings 21, by the way, saying, on the plot of ground at Jezreel, dogs shall eat the flesh of Jezebel, and the corpse of Jezebel shall be as refuse on the surface of the field in the plot at Jezreel, so that they shall not say, here lies Jezebel. And so this entire thing had been prophesied again 15 plus years earlier. But, you know, like, note here this, right? So this is actually like the first sign. Like, we might think, prior to this, we might think that Jehu is going to end up being like a godly king, right? Because he's been anointed by Elisha. He's fulfilling Elijah's prophecy. He has killed now a bunch of really bad kings. He's just killed a really evil woman. And so maybe he's going to actually be a great king. But even this sort of small kind of aside here, where he's like, hey, like, go get her and bury her, right? Even that, the kind of shows, had he really been paying attention to Elijah's prophecy, he wouldn't have done that, right? Because the prophecy was not that she's going to have a great fall and be buried, you know, with the rest of the royalty. That was not the prophecy. But he either forgot that or whatever. But things are going to start to kind of get a little bit off track here with Jehu, actually pretty quickly. But anyways, they didn't want to have a grave for her because we didn't want people going to remember her at her grave, which is what the last verse in chapter 9 says. That brings us to 2 Kings chapter 10. We'll see how much of this we can cover. 2 Kings 10, verse 1. Now Ahab had 70 sons in Samaria. This is going to be problematic, right? Because the charge to Jehu was wipe out Ahab's family, all of them, right? And sons or even grandsons, it could be a translation, maybe some of both. If there were some people downstream from Ahab, they could have a rightful claim to the throne. And so, again, this is going to be problematic. Middle of verse 1, and Jehu wrote and sent letters to Samaria, to the rulers of Samaria, to the elders, to those who reared Ahab's sons. And so Jehu knows about these sons or grandsons or family, whatever they are. And so he sends letters back to Samaria. And this is going to be a 25-mile trek from Jezreel to Samaria. Samaria is the formal capital of Israel. He sends them some letters and says, now as soon as this letter comes to you, this is verse 2, since your master's sons are with you, and you have chariots and horses, a fortified city also, and weapons, choose the best qualified of your master's sons. Let him sit on his father's throne and fight for your master's house. And so everyone knows at this point in time that Jehu has taken over. But these 70 sons would have a right to claim to the throne. So he's like, hey, rather than us having a big war together, why don't you just kind of nominate one of your guys, and I'll fight him, kind of like a David and Goliath kind of thing, right? Like rather than an army against an army, like one against one, it'll be cleaner. And so, just pick one of 70, and that's how we'll do things. Verse 4. But they were exceedingly afraid. Yeah, because Jehu doesn't seem like a stable guy, right? They're afraid. And they said, look, 2 kings couldn't stand up to him. How then can we stand? Like, we're just a bunch of educators teaching we're homeschooling, like these 70 people, right? How can we withstand, like, Jehu and the army? Verse 5. And he who was in charge of the house, and he who was in charge of the city, the elders also, and those who reared the sons, sent Jehu a letter, and saying, we are your servants. We will do all you tell us, but we will not make anyone king. Do what's good in your sight. This is actually a pretty wise response, right? Verse 6. And then Jehu wrote a second letter to them, saying, if you are for me and will obey my voice, take the heads of the men of your master's sons and come to me at Jezreel by this time tomorrow, right? And so his kind of note is, I want you to decapitate all 70 sons and bring me their heads by this time tomorrow. Again, this is a 25-mile distance, right? It takes about a day to go 25 miles. So he's like, do this now, essentially, is what he's saying, right? Don't delay. Middle of verse 6, now the king's sons, 70 persons, were with the great men of the city who were rearing them. We've already read that 3 times. Verse 7, and so it was, when the letter came to them, that they took the king's sons, and they slaughtered 70 persons, and they put their heads in baskets, and sent them to him at Jezreel. Then a messenger came and told him, saying, they have brought the heads of the king's sons. He says, well, then lay them in 2 heaps at the entrance of the gate until morning. I bet that would be a pretty good deterrent, right? A couple piles of heads, right? This is what Jehu does to people who are against him, right? And so I think, again, probably a pretty good sort of deterrent for what he was after. Verse 9, and so it was in the morning that he went out and stood and said to the people, you are righteous. Indeed, I conspired against my master and killed him. But who killed all these? Well, y'all did. Know now that nothing shall fall to the earth of the word of the Lord, which the Lord spoke concerning the house of Ahab, for the Lord has spoken and he has done what he spoke by his servant Elijah. And so he's saying, hey, this is all a fulfillment of Elijah's prophecy back in 1 Kings 21, verses 17 through 24. You go read that. But that's where Elijah prophesied this very thing that's just happened. And so Jehu is saying, hey, God's actually the one who did all of this. This is a fulfillment of prophecy. But verse 11, and so Jehu killed all who remained in the house of Ahab in Jezreel. That's what we just read about. And all his great men and his close acquaintances and his priests until he left none remaining. And so this is what we're going to see here with Jehu over the next chapter, this chapter that is that, I mean, he is zealous, but he's actually overzealous. And he does what God says, then goes above and beyond what God says as he thinks is right. It seems that Jehu really kind of has no control over his spirit, over his heart. Proverbs 16:32 says, he who is slow to anger is better than the mighty man, and he who rebukes his spirit than he who takes a city. Right? And it's this idea that, we all have a tendency to kind of get wrapped up in things. We all have a tendency to kind of to go too far sometimes, right? And Jehu here has definitely gone too far because the command was kill the house of Ahab. But he's killed the house of Ahab as well as all of Ahab's friends, all the great men, all the acquaintances, all the priests. He's wiped out everyone, which is not what God said to do. So verse 12, there's more. And he arose and he departed and went to Samaria. That's Jehu. So Jehu has now gone to Samaria where these 70 sons had come from. On the way, at Beth Eked of the shepherds, Jehu met with the brothers of Ahaziah, king of Judah, and said, who are you? Right. So remember, he's killed Ahaziah, the king of Judah. He's going to Samaria. He runs across, we're going to see 42 brothers or relatives of some sort. It can be a translation. Maybe they were cousins or whatever. And he meets these guys, and who are you? And so they answered, we're the brothers of Ahaziah. We have come down to greet the sons of the king and the sons of the queen mother. And so this is before texting and email, right? So they don't know that Ahaziah and Joram have been killed, that Jezebel's been killed, that the 70 sons of the king have been killed. They don't know any of this, right? I think probably kind of what they're doing is I think they're traveling probably to Jezreel, sort of to give their their comfort, to show up, and to wish that Jehoram would recover from his injuries that he got in the battle at Ramoth Gilead, which is why he was in Jezreel, right? I think they're kind of just going with some flowers and greeting cards and whatever, right? And they don't know what's happened. Verse 14, and he said, take them alive. And so they took them alive, and they killed them at the well of Beth Eked, 42 men, and he left none of them. But yet more unreasonable carnage, because God's command in 2 Kings 9, down 1 through 10, it was to wipe out the house of Ahab. That was the command. But now he's killing and all of the brothers, all the relatives of Ahaziah, and these folks weren't related at all by blood to Ahab. They had no claim on the throne, but yet he still wipes them out and kills them, right? Which kind of shows that zeal sometimes can be wrapped up sort of in righteousness, but it's really just someone's bloodlust and someone's overzealous nature. And so, again, this is going to be Jehu's problem, that he just kind of kills them all. When he wasn't supposed to kill them all, he was supposed to just kill these folks over here. Verse 15, now when he departed from there, he met Jehonadab, the son of Rechab, coming to meet him. And he greeted him and said to him, is your heart right, as my heart is right towards you? And Jehonadab answered, it is. And Jehu said, if it is, then give me your hand. And so he took his hand, and he took him up into his chariot. Verse 16, and he said, come with me and see my zeal for the Lord. So he had him ride in his chariot. So again, he thinks that all this carnage, this is all zeal that he's showing for the Lord. But it was sort of above and beyond, right? It's possible to have more zeal than knowledge, right? And it seems to be what's happening here with Jehu. And so this guy here, Jehonadab, was a godly man who comes up a few times in the text. He comes up even actually hundreds of years later as well, by way of memory. But he's a godly man who loved the Lord and wanted to see the worship of God restored in Israel and in Judah. So now he's riding with the unstable Jehu in his chariot. Verse 17, and when he came to Samaria, he killed all who remained to Ahab in Samaria, till he had destroyed them according to the word of the Lord, which he spoke to Elijah. And so apparently there were some stragglers hanging out who actually were related. He kills all of them as well. I think the problem is he seems to be enjoying this. He seems to be enjoying the carnage, going above and beyond. Even thinks that this is actually what God wants, as is evidenced by the fact he's bragging about it. He's showing it to this godly man, Jehonadab, the son of Rechab. Well, verse 18, 5 minutes left here. So, then Jehu gathered all the people together and said to them, Ahab served Baal a little, Jehu will serve him much. Now, therefore, call to me all the prophets of Baal, all the servants, all his priests, let no one be missing, for I have a great sacrifice for Baal. Whoever is missing shall not live. And so Jehu acted deceptively with the intent of destroying the worshipers of Baal, because this was part of the charge from God that he received earlier. Verse 20, Jehu said, proclaim a solemn assembly for Baal. So they proclaimed it. Then Jehu sent throughout all Israel, and all the worshipers of Baal came, so that there was not a man left who didn't come. And so they came into the temple of Baal, and the temple of Baal was full from one end to the other. And he said to the one in charge of the wardrobe, bring out the vestments for the worshipers of Baal. And so he brought out the vestments for them. Then Jehu and Jehonadab, the son of Rechab, went into the temple of Baal and said to the worshipers of Baal, search and see that no servants of the Lord are here with you, but only the worshipers of Baal. And so they went in to offer sacrifices and burnt offerings. Now Jehu had appointed for himself 80 men on the outside and said, if any one of the men that I have brought into your hands escapes, whoever shall escape, let someone escape, it'll be his life for the life of the other. Now it happened, as soon as he had made an end of the offerings of the burnt offering, that Jehu said to the guard and to the captain, go in and kill them, and let no one come out alive. and they killed them with the edge of the sword. And the guards and the officers threw them out, and they went into the inner room of the temple of Baal. And they brought out the sacred pillars out of the temple of Baal and burned them. And they broke down the sacred pillar of Baal and tore down the temple of Baal and made it a refuse dump to this day. And thus Jehu destroyed Baal from all Israel. And so this seems like a really good thing. He's wiped out the false worship of Baal, right? And does so in this pretty kind of efficient way, kind of gather them together under this ruse and then sort of kill them all, which is what he does. But, verse 29, however, Jehu did not turn away from the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, who had made Israel sin. That is, from the golden calves that were at Bethel and Dan. And so if you remember, this entire problem started hundreds of years earlier, way back in 1 Kings chapter 11 and 12. When Solomon dies, his son Rehoboam is on the throne of the entire nation. It's one nation. He's a bit power hungry. He offends some people. And because of that, Jeroboam gets 10 tribes. So Jeroboam is the first king of Israel. Rehoboam is the king of Judah. And Jeroboam he introduces this false worship of false gods, or even in his mind, the worship of the true God, but doing it in a false way with these golden calves that were built, right? And so while Jehu wipes out all the Baal worship, he doesn't actually lead in the worship of the right God the right way. He leaves these golden calves, which were a stepping stone to the worship of the wrong God. And we can't unpack this now, but I'll throw it out there. It's not enough to worship the correct God. You must worship the correct God correctly, right? And this is where Jehu gets it wrong, right? Go read the first and second commandments if you want to kind of think through that. But verse 30, and the Lord said to Jehu, because you have done well, you've done what's right in my sight, and have done to the house of Ahab all that was in my heart, and your sons, therefore, shall sit on the throne of Israel for 4 generations. He's going to get like 60 years of reign because he was obedient, at least half obedient. But, verse 31, Jehu took no heed to walk in the law of the Lord of Israel with all his heart, and he did not depart from the sins of Jeroboam, who had made Israel sin. Because of his half obedience, verse 32, in those days the Lord began to cut off parts of Israel, and Hazael conquered them in all the territory of Israel, from the Jordan eastward, all the land of Gilead, Gad, Reuben, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, from Arar, which is by the river, Arnon, including Gilead and Bashan. And so God's giving him rain, but he's taken away parts of the land because of the lack of full obedience. And so, end of the chapter, now the rest of the acts of Jehu, all that he did, and all his might, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel? Yeah, they are. So Jehu rested with his fathers, and they buried him in Samaria. And then Jehoahaz, his son, reigned in his place. And the period that Jehu reigned over Israel in Samaria was 28 years. And so, we're almost sort of through with the story of Ahab and his death. But there's one character outstanding. There's still Athaliah, the wife of Ahaziah, who's been killed. And she is the daughter of Ahab. So come back next week, and we'll see Athaliah's demise. And that'll then sort of end the story of Ahab and his evil minions. Time's gone. I'll pray and we'll be dismissed. Father, thank you for your word. Thank you for your righteousness. Lord, indeed, we are comforted by the fact that indeed you are always aware of the good and the bad. Lord, you're always keeping track. Lord, as you've promised, Lord, indeed, you will punish evildoers and reward the just, those that are in Christ and you. We're thankful for that. Lord, give us eyes to see you at work, even when it seems like evil is winning. Lord, give us confidence, Lord, to know that indeed you are over all things, Lord. And I pray, Lord, as we see the promises in your word, I trust, Lord, that they would take root in our heart, and that as we read your word each week, that you would use it to make us more like Christ. And we pray all this in his name. Amen. I'll see you all next week.